Welcome back, crew. Today we are going to be doing a review of the Pathfinder 2E system, focused on what it feels like from both the player and GM perspective, going from levels 1 through 5. Which I'm pretty hyped to do because typically with this channel, we get to go through and dive in for a game for a month and reviewing it at a high level and then moving on to the next system. For Pathfinder 2e, since it's become one of our channel's main campaign games, we're going to be going through and breaking out each 5 level group, kind of each tier of the system, and just kind of going over what it feels like from the GM and player perspective to play through it. So, Definitely, if you haven't had a chance, we're running through our campaign Pandemonium. It's hosted right here on Tegan J Gaming, Pathfinder 2e campaign. We're on level 5, about 4 sessions into level 5 so far. This has been a blast to run. Great story, great party. We've had some fun going through with crazy combats and just really cool character moments. Highly recommend it. But with us going through and posting it on YouTube, I thought it would be cool to kind of go through and see what we love about the system so far, maybe some things that we just haven't connected with, and what you're excited for the system in the future. So, to kick it off, I want to go over a couple of the variant rules we're using, just so you kind of know what perspective we're coming across. The biggest one, this is probably the most common variant and one I highly recommend for most groups. Free archetype, I've loved it. It's been an amazing addition to both just having seen what the PCs can come up with their build, just even mechanics wise, but adding some cool flavor, some extra depth to the players as well, and kind of bringing some of the RP and some of their flavor into mechanic base as well. Um, any campaign I ran with Pathfinder 2e, unless it's like brand new people and I'm trying to keep it simple, I would run free archetype. It does add some complexities. It does add a little bit extra build time and things that they have to look up, but I don't think it's too unmanageable. And I think it just adds so much cool flavor, so much depth, and so much more variety for what your PCs can pull off that it's just worth keeping in there. One thing I would say I tweaked with the free archetype compared to kind of the rules as written, because typically you get free archetype at level 2 and then every even level. So after you get to pick an archetype feat. With this system, I thought I'd mix it up a little bit and give it to them at level 1. And the main reason I did that is, like, let's pick on our Beastmaster, for instance. Some of those archetypes flow better starting the campaign with versus having to kind of explain them midway through. So I wanted our Beastmaster to start with the Beast. I wanted our player that's kind of an Asimar with the kind of divine mix between sorcerer and psychic to start with that as well, just so they could kind of hit the ground running, not have to do any weird retconning or explaining on that side. And the thing is, it flowed perfectly because basically the only changes you get your archetype feat 1 level earlier. Level 2 for that one's a dead feat, but then after that you get back into the every even levels. So one I'd recommend on that side, in case you're kind of worried about the flavor like I was, doesn't change the balance much and is very easy to flow with. And for speaking with that too, I know some GMs are worried about implementing free archetype because they're worried it may tweak the balance or make the players too strong and kind of throw off kind of Pathfinder's encounter math. I have not found that at all. I found that the free archetype bonuses are usually pretty moderate, and that the 3 action system, as well as the tight math for kind of what you can do, will hone in the players and not really allow them to get too crazy with what their PCs can do. There are a few things that can tweak the balance. I'll touch on those in one of our and when we get through the review. Free archetype is not one of them. Same thing with Ancestral Paragon. Just gives them some more options they can pick and allows them to really kind of experience the best part about Pathfinder 2e, and that's the flexibility of what you can build with the depth, flexibility, and just kind of range of characters you can build with the system. And I think giving your players more tools to do so, especially since it won't affect the combat and counterbalance, is just a great thing to do. So yeah, we've run free archetype, Ancestral Paragon, and then another big favorite for me, and I know this one's a little bit more controversial, but I love the automatic bonus progression, ABP. I'm not a huge loot GM. I hate having to kind of research and do a whole bunch of kind of exactly who has what loot, what do they need to be balanced to this level, and all of that. ABP eliminates that. And also, from the flavor perspective, I love the PCs being strong on their own versus having to be strong due to magic items, especially some of the more martial PCs. So I really enjoy that. ABP gets rid of all that kind of just encounter or loot that you have to keep track of. And still, I've given them a lot of cool loot that they can utilize as well, but it just doesn't have to be mandatory. They get the things they need for their own strength, and you don't have to keep track of every fundamental rune that needs to be where. So those are my three, and definitely ABP. I've not noticed any crazy out of balance difficulties with it. It's ran smooth and pretty easy to implement. And especially shout outs to Foundry and Path Builder. They both make those, all three of those, very easy to utilize. Yeah, let's dive into some of what are roses, thorns, and buds for Pathfinder 2E levels 1 through 5. Probably my biggest of just overall rose, something I've just really enjoyed with this is the three action system and how well it goes in from the GM perspective to encounter building. One of the things I struggled with 5e, especially for like encounters, where you want something to be going on that's just outside of typical combat norms. Like in our one of our sessions, I think session 12, we had a vehicle chase. So there's rules with the vehicles for kind of how you could steer and how different things would work. Uh, and it really flows so well with the three action system because you can just have them do whatever that intricate action is, whether it be steering the vehicle, one of the sessions if they had to stop a ritual, and just different things you can add on to them that can either just burn an action or two, but still leave them with actions they can kind of use to contribute. Because 5e I always struggled with. Because if you make something a bonus action for some classes, that's no impact to them at all. Some it's a little punishing, but if you make it something in action, like to steer the vehicle or stop the ritual, it feels like they don't get to do anything that turn. So it's just really one of those hard to balance with make it feel impactful, especially impactful across classes. But with this system, it's very easy to do and allows you to really get creative as a GM with what counter objectives you want to add in, because you can do so without having to worry about class balance and about how it'll feel for the players. So really big on that side, and just kind of just allows everybody to think of what they want to do and do some cool things. If they want to be more damage oriented, if they want to intimidate and move and heal, they can really go through and just plot out from their skills, classes, and actions, kind of what they can do on their turn. So, major roles to three action system, and especially how it interacts with different combat objectives you can put into the game. Another big thing too, I like that they have. This is just another thing coming from 5e that they've got the magic items balanced by level. Just makes it easy if you're searching for things to give to your player. And especially a big shout out to both Any Plane as well as Archives of Nexus. It just makes it so easy to go through and search for by level and item and different types. I was going through and looking for something for one of my players, and they were kind of illusion based sometimes. So I thought, oh, maybe we can go through and look for illusion and then exactly the different items in this level range, and find something that's cool and fair to give to them too. So major shout out for that, especially you don't have to do a lot of the guesstimation like you have to do with some other systems. And that's kind of one of the big things throughout Pathfinder 2, and other grows I'll give to it, is it's one of the systems that does the hard work for you as a GM with kind of the balance side. One of my players actually, in their perspective, said it helps. The system makes itself the bad guy, so the GM doesn't have to be the bad guy and say no and kind of restrict things down and all of that. Which I know is a common refrain from 5e GMs. You've got to be so careful with towing that balance line. And it's been really freeing for myself to be able to be the one that gives them something cool or gives them something extra without having to worry about, oh, is this going to be just game breaking? Am I have to tweak counters to it? Everything just flows very easily, and you don't have to really get too out of your norm with the encounter building system. Other things too that I've really enjoyed, especially like I really recommend going through the GM core as well as looking at all the different books they've got, or even going through archives and Nexus to kind of find some of the different subsystems. Because vehicles are really cool. I like the vehicle rules they brought in. We've used ley lines, we've used the relic rules, and relics are really, especially if you're an ABP GM, relics are a great way to give your players some cool additional abilities through loot. And I like the soul seed variant too, so you don't have to get an actual relic. You can just attach it to their soul. Just a lot of cool stuff spread throughout the book. So it's kind of a little bit of a rose and a thorn, because GM Core has a lot of great stuff. But even just reading through like Secrets of Magic, the Howl of the Wild, there's so many cool different systems and subsystems that have come out through those books, and it's kind of hard to find them if you're not just reading the book. Because Archive Nessus has them all there, but it's not a great. At least I haven't found a great way to search it. Shout in the comments if you know a better way to do so, outside of just kind of scrolling through your PDF or reading your book and kind of seeing, oh, that's a cool thing. I could integrate this way. But overall, great subsystems that just really make life easy for the GM, because you can kind of use them and twist them if you need to, but you don't have to come up and reinvent the wheel. Also, kind of going along with that too, Like, systems are fairly easy to get your head around. I know that's one of the worries with Pathfinder 2. It's a crunchy system, and I'm not going to deny that. There's a strong an entry barrier, I'll say, because you have to get everything kind of learning the rule sets and kind of learning how everything flows. If you're going to be the game master player, a little bit easier. You just got to get used to the three action system and kind of work with your crew to understand the rest. But as a GM, once you get the basic rules for Pathfinder 2e, everything usually kind of spins from them or flows fairly easily. And it's definitely in between archives of Nexus and even Demiplane, it's easy to kind of do a quick Google search and find, hey, oh, this is what that rule is. This is how we can apply it. And even outside of that, it's easy to kind of guesstimate what that rule would be and keep the table moving too, in case you don't want to pause it to search, which we've done a couple times. Last big rose, I will say, on that side is it's been fun, especially as we get into the like level 3, 4, and 5, 4 and 5 especially. It's been cool to see the different abilities and resources that some of the monsters and creatures bring to bear. It's just it's because the early levels and just due to early levels, they've got to be a little bit muted. But as you get into the later levels, especially if you get a chance to run one of your first dragons, we ran a what was it? I think it was a young fire dragon for our level 4 encounter. It was just a blast, all the crazy things they get to do, and just different ways you can keep your players on their toes with it. So definitely as you get in, I know 'cause we played a lot with level 1 and 2 with different one shots and things like that. It was just cool to see how it expands, and even looking ahead to the bestiaries and all of that. The higher level you get, the crazier the monsters get, and the more fun they are for the game master to run. So definitely a big rose, and that's also a bud too, as we get to the kind of the higher tiers to kind of see what craziness they can bring out and how the PCs will overcome them. Last big thing I'll say too, especially for like online resources, Pathfinder 2e has so many great online resources. Foundry is amazing. Archives of Nexus is amazing. Path Builder is crazy amazing. If you haven't yet, go buy it and make sure that you support them any way that you can, because it just makes the system easier to get into, easier to build a PC and run the game. One of the things I loved as a game master too, if you don't have it up to throw the name of the Foundry mod in there. I'm blanking on it, but there's a Monster Builder Foundry mod. You can go right in, like quickly build a monster that's appropriate level, appropriate challenge to the PCs in like 5 minutes. Like less than five. I've done it while PCs were talking before. So it's just a really sort of cool tools on inside to help make GMing easier, make and just kind of allow you to tell the story and let it flow as it will without having to worry about panicking and prepping ahead of time. So great on that side. But yeah, those are my core roses. Let's take a look at some of the thorns that I've had from kind of the game master perspective. And one of the things I will say is the encounter math is very tight. For the average group, it'll flow very well and kind of get that appropriate challenge level. One thing I found with my group though is they're very synergistic and work pretty well together. They've got great healing, they've got a lot of great DPS, they've got good tanks. They flow together, and I would say they're optimized to a little bit. So it's one of those ones that, especially the earlier levels, threw the math off a little bit because they're playing very well and making some great strategies and doing some great damage. So it did have to kind of tweak the encounter math a little bit just to make sure that they're being properly challenged. But one of the things I've noticed too is they level up too. It's also starting to smooth out a bit as well, which is nice too. I was worried with the abilities they had, the kind of the synergy they brought into it, it would just kind of get multiply and get worse as it went through. But levels 4 and 5, especially so far, it seems like they're kind of right in that pocket for it, especially if they do a longer adventuring day. That's also a little bit of a thorn for me too, because the system doesn't really go over what the adventuring day should be for Pathfinder 2e, but you definitely need to have an adventuring day. Especially if you don't have spellcasters, it doesn't really matter too much with the spellcasters, especially if you've got a cleric or somebody with healing abilities. It can really throw off sort of the encounter balance and kind of how deadly or how challenging something should be. So it's one thing I wish they just went into a little bit. I'm kind of getting the feel for it myself, and I may do a video as we get further into the campaign. Just some things, ways to tweak and counterbalance, uh, just with kind of the more experience we get on there. But it's just one to keep in mind, especially if you've got a group that's optimized and kind of covers all the big holes within there, and especially if they're optimized to be able to recall knowledge, intimidate, and buff, and do all the cool things they can do to really kind of change the math. It's it can we can throw it off a little bit. Definitely, and when I say throw it off a little bit too, it's Not to the extent where some groups, I hate to keep picking on 5e, but we'll compare it to 5e today since it's the other big game in that same style and market. But 5e, if you get some crazy like synergistic groups that are really kind of stacked their weaknesses, they can just steamroll through things. With this one, they've been able to beat some encounters I thought were more challenging, or easily beat encounters I thought would be more challenging, but nothing too egregious. And usually with those ones, it's just they've got a couple of lucky crits, or the crits are just rolling poorly, and counterbalance can account for dice luck. So it's one of those ones. It's a small thorn, but definitely a thorn I would mention, especially um, one that I was kind of worried about because with how tight the Pathfinder encounter math is, I was kind of surprised that my group fell out of it. But kind of going through and looking at kind of how they play and how the roles they cover, it makes sense that they're just a little bit optimized, which threw it off a little bit. Definitely nothing too crazy. We've got some great challenges going with it too. So last big thorn I'll say from my perspective, and then we're gonna go into some of our players' ones, uh, is the early level monster variety. And that said, that's one of the things that started changing, level 4 or 5 plus. But early levels, it does kind of feel like you're kind of locked in, and I get it. There's not really too much crazy they can do and be appropriate challenged at that. But it was kind of hard to kind of go through and find some of the where you can kind of get a good challenge for them. One last thorn I'll mention, and also give a cool resource that would help me get past this thorn. Is there not a lot of humanoid blocks? They're kind of like just regular people, NPC blocks for within the system. I know the the GM handbook, the one that came before the GM core, had a cool section on it. I had to use some from there, and I know they're building a new NPC core book too that'll help kind of give some cool, just humanoid or kind of more person style creatures that you can throw into your battles. But that was definitely one of my big gaps on that side because I was worried I'd have to kind of kill through and build a lot of my own NPCs that are humanoid and then kind of to get them in there to run, which adds extra time and extra prep. But I'll throw a link in the comments. Shout outs to Jam and Jax's NPC Codex. They've got ones for like specialists, for like rogues and monks. They've got spellcasters. They've got kind of the warrior classes like the fighters, barbarians, all of those. And it's been great, especially with the Foundry module, because I can go through and think, how would this NPC act, or kind of what class do they fall into? Find some NPCs, and they got a great level range up, kind of up from early levels, level one. I think they go up to level 20 for their NPCs on that side. And you can just go through, slot them in, and it makes life and prep so much easier. Highly recommend them because it would be a very big thorn otherwise, which I'm glad they're kind of rectifying with the NPC core that's coming out next year. But if you don't want to wait that long, Jam and Jax's Codex, it just gives you a lot of options to run with. Yeah, let's go. Last big things I'll mention some items my player's perspective wanted to cover, and we covered a couple, like a lot of the roses in my first section, but there were a couple of thorns that the players mentioned. One of them, I'll start with the ones I really kind of connect with me, and some of the ones I didn't see too much, but they brought up as well. The first one being that spellcasters do have a higher system mastery threshold required to kind of build a strong PC, but they also kind of have the same ceiling as marshals. So you have to kind of know a good bit more than you have to build like a solid marshal, but you kind of get some cap too, which I know can be a little bit frustrating, especially for people new to the system or people coming from 5e where the spellcasters were very powerful, or not, in my opinion, overpowered. So it's just one of those ones that can be kind of a hard piece to balance because you do have to read so many different things between the different feats for the spellcasters, different spells, and this kind of dovetails into my next big thorn. Is there's so many spells and so many of them aren't really that great in my opinion. Which makes it harder for the spellcasters. You got to go through and read each spell, and a lot of times they are not super amazing, or they feel like they could just be sometimes even leveled spells feel like they could be a cantrip or just even multiple ones mashed in together. But it's one of those ones that does just add additional complexity to the spellcasters and additional hoops they have to jump through. So definitely one to keep in mind as a game master and as a player. One and those are kind of the two big ones that really connect with me. The other one I will say too, and this one I don't. I definitely acknowledge, but it's not one I really feel is a thorn. It's kind of a piece of the system, but definitely one that my players brought in as a little bit of a thorn too. is the feats feel very incremental. A lot of times they're not, especially for the spellcasters. My two spellcasters, or one of my spellcasters, was the one that brought this in. Is the feats feel pretty incremental, nothing too crazy, nothing that really super changes their build. And for the marshals, I feel like they get a lot of great stuff that goes through with them, and like it's definitely incremental for their side, but still gives them more variety. But for the spellcasters, I notice in the noticer, also kind of building that against the utility of spells, but there are more incremental, more muted, and just kind of not as crazy for the things that you can do. With those last two pieces I'll mention from my player's perspective, is it also character creation they feel can take a lot of time, especially if you're not one that's usually into theory crafting. Or also on the other side, if you're into or kind of a character building and character crafting to a big extent, it could feel from both sides that you're spending a lot of time doing so. For those that don't like to do it, they feel like there's any time they're spending on that can be too much. And for those that like it, can just really get lost in the rabbit hole and spend hours and hours building their PC. So this is one of the things to keep in mind as a GM. From my perspective, and I love building characters, I haven't really noticed that one too much. My players brought it up, and I wanted to make sure we shouted that out for that level 1 through 5 experience. Yeah, overall, those are the big pieces on that side. The only other thing I would give out is some shout outs to resources that I've used to help make life easier. Uh, Big shout out again to Jam and Jax's NPC Codex. That saved me hours from having to go through and build my own NPCs. Uh, Foundry, Patch Builder, they just make life so easy, especially with all the modules and how quick they are to get things into the system. Archives of Nexus 2 is great for being able to go through and search and find things easily. There's just so many great resources I found that are usually free, if not very limited cost. That just makes GMing Pathfinder 2e so easy. And this limited cost is a big thing. I know I found a lot of cool resources when I was a 5e GM, but a lot of times those were pretty expensive. So all the ones I found here outside of well, I think Foundry, you had to pay for Foundry itself. You have to pay for Pathfinder. And then Path Builder, you can use it for free, but there's a $5, I think $5 upgrade to all the different additional rules and kind of support the system too. So pretty inexpensive. And the NPC Codex, I think, was like 15 or $20 for all three of them. So it's just really not crazy expensive and just really cool things that help improve your game and help make life a lot easier. Yeah, overall, this was a little bit of a lengthy look into levels 1 through 5 from both my perspective and my player's perspective. Definitely shout out in the comments kind of what your experience has been if you got a chance to play through, or if you have questions and haven't had a chance to run through levels 1 through 5, kind of what you're interested in, kind of what falls you're worried about, or things we can kind of give our own experience on. And then definitely there'll be a link below. If you want to see this played out, check out Pandemonium. We're at level 5 right now. It's really cool to a bit of fun campaign, and I think you all would enjoy it. So definitely check that out. But like, subscribe, and stay tuned. We've got our June game month coming up. There'll be a link down for our Patreon too. If you're part of the Patreon, vote for what you want us to cover in June. And this weekend, we'll get our first video up and start scheduling our game of the month for that too. So check out that link. And if you're interested in being a supporter too, we'd love to have you on our Patreon. But thanks for hanging out, and until next time.